3 years ago, I was making decent money in my corporate job, but I felt completely trapped, constantly trading time for money with no real upside. Today, I run a $40,000 plus remote cleaning arbitrage business, and I've helped hundreds of clients replace their own incomes in as little as 4 to 6 months. So today, I'm going to give you the exact step-by-step blueprint I use to replace my own income, including these specific revenue milestones, safety nets, and timelines that made this possible. So let's start with the foundation, calculating your real number. Most people will make the critical mistake of thinking they have to replace their exact salary, and that is the gross number. But that's not really how it works when you start to own your own business. Here's how I would figure out the monthly number to actually replace your income. First, I would look at your take-home pay after taxes specifically. If you're making around $80K a year, that means you're probably taking home around $55 to $60K depending on what state you live in. That's about $4,500 to $5,000 per month in actual spending money. But here's where it gets interesting. When you own a business, you're going to have certain tax advantages by actually just owning this entity. Now, I'm not a tax professional, but there are things that you can take advantage of. You can write off your home office. You can write off your business expenses. You can write off travel and other kinds of expenses that you have running your life. So your business might only need to produce $6,000 to $7,000 of net income to actually produce the same lifestyle as if you were making $80,000 per year. Next, you would factor in what you're actually going to lose from your job. Health insurance is usually the biggest ticket item. That's around $500, could be upwards to $1,000 per month for that expense. You'll lose your 401k match if that's something that you signed up for. It's usually a couple hundred, $200 to $400 per month as well. So you're going to want to add that to your total in addition. For me personally, I calculated that I needed $8,500 per month in income from my business to be able to replace my 100K plus salary job. That was taking into consideration everything I just mentioned, right? That includes the write-offs as well as the things that you would lose from walking away from a job. But here is the critical part. I did not just aim for $8,500 and call it a day. I first put the target of I'm going to achieve 17,000 recurring revenue in order to hit that milestone. The reason why I picked that number is that if you're running a 50% gross margin business, which is typically what you would expect, that's going to equal 8,500 from the 17,000. So that was my safety margin number, because if I walked into the next month with 17,000 in recurring revenue, I would obviously produce more revenue on top of that. So that was just walking in. I had that money no matter what, because the last thing you want to do is quit your job and then basically be paycheck to paycheck, or even worse than that, heading into the next month of your business. That would mean that regardless of generating a single dollar for the next month, I would cover my entire overhead expenses. So that's the first part of it. I would say you want to get those unit economics correct, so that way you feel comfortable about making that transition. The second part is having a safety nest for when you make that transition. Obviously, you don't want to live paycheck to paycheck even when you're running a business. That's not the best way to live in that survival mindset. Now, some people use that to motivate them, and there are cases where people do it, but I honestly don't recommend doing that. Now, there's kind of two schools of thought. Some people think that they need to save years into their savings before they would make this transition. I'm kind of, somewhere in between. I would tell you, if you have anywhere in the range of 3 to 6 months of actual safety net to go out and start a business, you can tell yourself, listen, I'm going to put more time into the company than I was putting before, on top of already covering all of my overhead expenses like we talked about before. And I think if you put that savings number to like 1 or 2 years, I think that's actually counterproductive, because you're just delaying the start and you have more than enough margin for safety at that point. So for me, what I built was, I basically said, if I have the 3 to 6 months of savings, that's my green light signal that I can go into this full time, assuming that I'm still running the company well and still hitting my overhead. In addition to that, I wanted to see 3 months of covering that overhead before I would even make that transition. That way I knew that it wasn't just luck, and it gave me an approach that had some confidence towards making this kind of transition, because it is a big, big deal. I wanted to know that I was consistently hitting my minimum requirements for doing so. Now, I mentioned this before, but the approach from Naval Ravikant, where I tell you about not lifestyle upgrading when you start making more money from your business, I think that's very, very key when you go through this process as well. It's probably the most important time to live like a smart broke person. So living significantly below your means for a period of time as you reinvest into your business, as you start saving so you can make this transition, is going to be crucial. And just to go over one more time really quickly, you're canceling those unnecessary subscriptions, you're not spending money going out, you're cooking at home, you're meal prepping, you're not buying luxury goods and clothing, you're just keeping what you have, working with what you have, and making all of those sacrifices. Now, that's not to say you have to be cheap necessarily, but you have to be in the mindset that I'm in a period of trying to achieve freedom, and it's going to have to come with some level of sacrifice in the short term. So every dollar that I'm not spending on lifestyle inflation is a dollar that I can allocate towards my business, whether that's better systems, more marketing spend, hiring better cleaners, whatever it might be. But those are the sacrifices you want to make, because that gives you that upside and the beauty of being in entrepreneurship, that you can put that and get that output that you wouldn't be able to get at your normal job. So while coworkers were buying new cars or going on vacations, I was doing none of that at the time, and I was focusing on my escape plan. I think if you have this mindset, I think this is how you actually compress the timeline. If you don't do that, I think you're going to have the 2 to 3 to 5 year timeline to actually make this transition. But if you operate like this, you're accelerating, compressing everything that we just talked about in terms of milestones you want to hit, and you can do this in under a year. Now, another part of this whole thing is actually balancing the challenge of having a demanding job and then also running a growing business, all without burning out. My personal approach, and although I don't think there's a best approach, I think you should just be trying as hard as you can during this period of time, but I started small and systematically. So in the first month, when there wasn't as much work to do, I just made sure that I was committing at least 1 to 2 hours per day, getting the highest priority tasks done each and every day, whether that's calling everybody back from my sales pipeline, conducting cleaner interviews if I was low on cleaner capacity at the time, whatever it might be, but I was just focusing on what is the most important thing that's going to drive revenue today. Quick example of this would be like during lunch breaks. I would call this my sales power hour, just because 12 and 1 is a very high pickup rate for, normal people, because they're out of the office, they're going to lunch, they're doing one errand or something, they can actually pick up a call. So I would make calls and hit, 20 people on my list to make sure that I got some sales in the door for the day. And I think if you're thinking in this way, it is a fast track to being efficient, because you're thinking, what is the most important thing I have to do? And then I have to do it within this time frame each and every day. And holding yourself accountable to it is a great habit if you're trying to juggle all of that at once. Now, as the business grew, it did require more time. It did require more attention, especially when I was still the only person operating the company. And I would tell you, this is probably the most stressful period that I personally went through, but in my opinion, it was all worth it at the end of the day. But this is when I started to wake up extremely early, at least for me. So I woke up at 5 a.m. every single morning, did work before work, had lunch to do the things that I even talked about, or the example I talked about, and I would work after work, right? So now I had extremely long days. I'm doing my demanding job, plus I'm running a company that's growing and honestly doing very well. But the key in all this is that if you do not build systems during this period of time when you're working very hard, this is the treadmill that you'll never be able to get off of, basically. So if you don't have automations in place, if you don't have systems in place, if you don't have everything organized, you're just going to be doing everything. It's going to be chaotic, and there's not going to be any opportunity for you to breathe. I'd say another kind of nugget is like anytime I had slow periods at the office, or when I didn't have a meeting that I had to be in and I could fit in a pocket of doing some extra tasks during my day, I would do that. I would make basically, that was my replacement of social media scrolling, if you want to use that as an example. But because you can run this entire business off of your phone, it makes this very easy to context switch if you need to do something, or if you have to put out a fire, or whatever it might be throughout the day, if you have pockets like that, which makes it great. Now let me share with you the specific revenue breakthroughs that contributed towards this transition and finally made me comfortable about making the actual jump. The first major breakthrough was really having a robust hiring, onboarding, and managing process for the cleaning team. I mentioned this in other videos as well, but that was really what got me stuck in that $7,000 to $8,000 range. I didn't have any of that set. I couldn't get a good team together, and therefore I was completely bottlenecked by not being able to fulfill on clients. And I ultimately was hiring out of desperation, not holding a high standard for how I want my company to be. So once I developed a more systematic approach to hiring, I started getting better cleaners. I used to filter through the bad ones quicker, which I think is really important. Not holding on to bad cleaners for a long period of time can kill your business, which ultimately led to retaining cleaners much, much longer once they actually gone through my process. Because everything was structured, there was clear alignment, there was clear incentives, and everyone wanted to be there. And once I figured that out, my revenue quickly jumped from like $8,000 a month to over $20,000 per month, just off figuring out that single piece. And I vividly remember having figured this out a bit once I started getting messages from clients that my cleaners did a great job, they did an amazing job, they just left a 5-star review, and I was in a meeting the entire time. So I wasn't involved at all, but because I had the people and the systems in place, everything was working to a T. To me, in that moment, it starts to not feel like a side hustle anymore. It starts to feel like, okay, I'm running a real business. Now, the second other breakthrough, and I mentioned this also before, was bringing in help on the management support side. And that was key in terms of reducing my time in the business. As you can imagine, as things increase and you're the only person to do everything, it just becomes too much for one person to handle, especially when you're juggling a job on top of that. But like I mentioned before, as I was scaling, there was a very, very intentional approach of making sure the systems were in place, making sure everything was documented, making sure there was SOPs, making sure that this was a process that could be repeated when I step away from the wheel. And from there, when I brought them in, they started to pull things off my plate gradually gradually week over week until they became proficient. They were selling at KPI. They could handle the morning management and customer service aspect of the business, and they could even run interviews and onboarding processes as well. And from there, that's kind of where everything changed. I went from like $20,000 a month to over $35,000 per month, but my time in the business dramatically reduced in terms of what I was actually doing each and every single day. And that breakthrough really taught me that there's a big difference between building a business and being a self-employed freelancer, which sometimes that's what it feels like when you're doing every single thing. But once you actually build the team out, you really understand that you can still grow revenue without proportionally adding more time spent in the business. It was at this point that I had that recurring revenue number that I talked about before, over $17,000 in recurring revenue achieved. So I felt very comfortable about potentially quitting my job and going into this full time. By the way, if you want to work with me and my team on building your own remote cleaning arbitrage business, click the first link in the description below. So when did I know that I was actually ready to make the jump? I want to be clear, I don't think you're going to feel ready ever, right? So if you feel like you have to wait for that moment, I don't think it'll ever come. There's always going to be a level of uncertainty when you make this kind of big transition. So for me, I really just went back to what are the criteria points that I said were going to make me feel comfortable about doing something like this? What's the recurring revenue number? I calculated what my overhead was. I knew I hit those numbers. I had that done for the trailing 3 months, and my time in the business has been reduced, and I knew if I put more time in the business, I can easily cover more than that. And let me tell you, when you do make that transition, it is mixed feelings, at least for me. Part of it was exciting, but the other part was very fearful too, because I was doing something I had never done before. Even though that the numbers were telling me that, hey, everything is good, psychologically, there's still something very challenging about giving up a secure paycheck. And I think as time went on, obviously I sit here on the other side of it now, but I realized that I think the bigger risk at the end of the day was staying at the job. I was capping my income potential. I was constantly trading my time for money, and there was no real opportunity for me to build long-term generational wealth through actually sitting in that desk. And those first 90 days after were very transformative. I was able to focus on my business. I was not drained. I had much more energy. I could focus on entirely growing the business. I grew our service area footprint. I improved our marketing spend. I brought on another member to our support team and refined our operations even further. And that's grown us to where we are today. And most importantly, I felt like I finally had control over my time. If it worked from anywhere, I could set my own hours, and I could focus on what actually drives the business forward. And I know what you're thinking. That sounds great that you were able to achieve it, but does this actually work for other people? So let me share you some specific examples of other individuals that I've worked with. Dan was in a similar situation, but had a different twist to it in that he wanted to keep his current company that he owns. He wanted to start a cleaning company, and hopefully, if he did well enough in the cleaning company, could transition his wife away from the job that she wasn't personally fond of. But Dan was able to hit 10,000 in just about 47 days. If you fast forward to where he's at today, he's over $35,000 in income, and he was able to get his wife away from that job, focus on the family, and achieve what he wanted to through the venture. And Zach, who does over $40,000 a month, still actually has his job. He likes both, so he's doing both. So that doesn't even need to mean that you have to walk away, but in his case, he could at any time he wants to. What I'm trying to illustrate is these aren't outliers, these aren't special people. These are people who made sacrifices to build this type of business, but they followed the same systematic approach that I used. And the key understanding is you're not just starting a cleaning business, you're building a cash flowing asset that allows you to fulfill what you want in terms of time, location, freedom, but also cover your overhead expenses and be a financial vehicle for yourself as well. And let me be extremely clear with this. This is not a get rich quick scheme. Every single person that I mentioned in this channel and every person that I have interviews with that does really well, they're putting in hard work every single day. However, it's not rocket science. So at the same time, it is achievable. You just have to be very diligent about what are the things that I have to do really well over a long period of time that will lead to the success. Because the cleaning industry is massive, fragmented, and underserved, there's a ton of opportunity for you to do this for yourself. The quickest way to leave your 9-to-5 is by building something so reliable that it seems like a bigger risk to stay. The remote cleaning business arbitrage model accomplishes this, in my opinion, because you're able to get that recurring revenue aspect of the business. It can be managed from anywhere, and it doesn't require a ton of startup capital to get started. So if you want to work with me and my team on your own quit your job plan, click on the link in the description below. I'll see you in the next video.